But this idea of a slow simulation of technology for the sake of a keen appraisal of it will look like within a rampant consumeristic and capitalist culture seem extreme, but it's the thing that's going to save you. It's the kind of discipline that's going to allow you to have full control over you.
Welcome to the Explorations Podcast, the show of interdisciplinary discussions for the self-learner. My name is Luis Hernandez. I'm joined by my fellow co-hosts, Edwin and Joe. Joe, first I'm going to ask, how are you doing out in New York City? What you've been up to and how you feeling right now?
I feel great chilling in Queens, though I had an opportunity with my wife to go to Brooklyn, a nice little coffee shop in Bay Ridge just the other day. And yeah, just hanging out, enjoying this little break between my winter module and before the spring semester kicks off. And so catching on some reading and just chilling.
Before we go to Edwin, Joe, real quick, we've been in this ongoing discussion about technology. In between our last discussion, has there been anything kind of like percolating in your mind or any impressions about tech without getting too much into it, but any like big thoughts in your mind prior to this conversation?
As I have been reflecting in the back of my mind concerning technology, I think the word autonomy comes to mind. And what I mean by that is technology, in my experience, begins to take upon itself its own freedom, its own life, its own animus. And we ought to perhaps really consider what that looks like as we continue to engage in it. So those are some of the things that were this idea of autonomy and its own life and whatnot.
And in Colorado, we got our good friend Edwin. Edwin, how have you been? What you've been up to, and what's on your mind?
Doing well. With a newborn, the only thing I've been up to is changing diapers. Yeah, family life over here.
Right.
All is good.
If there was like a device that cost $1,000, but it would make changing diapers autonomous, would you invest in it as a parent?
Yeah, that's probably the most painful thing to any parent.
Is that part specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I would probably be the richest man in the world if I figured that one out.
If you invented that?
Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting that, Joe, you brought up autonomy because
Yeah.
to start our conversation about technology, our previous discussion, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about Chat GPT, which is like in such a short amount of time, so much has changed, and we're going to jump into that. But I wanted to start our conversation, speaking of autonomy, about the train derailment in East Palestine in Ohio. There are some recent developments. It's still ongoing in regards to this disaster. But there are some recent developments in the world of tech that this train that was 2 miles long, controlled by like a 3-man crew, had these devices known as like hot boxes that were supposed to be sending sensor information to kind of like a control team, which is the company has like a bunch of analysts who were receiving signals from this device that the temperature of the train car, like it was exceeding the normal tolerance values. And so it went to this control center, this data center of people who then instructed the train crew, like, don't worry about it, even when they were like kind of skeptical about it. But there's this relationship to technology in the midst of that process that thinking about our conversation about man and its relationship to the machine and almost like the romance of it, did that play a part? Like, obviously, there's so many factors to this tragedy and this disaster. We don't know the full story. But when I heard that information yesterday, it made me think about this conversation. It made me think about it from the perspective of tech in a way that I wasn't before. So I wanted to open that question up to you guys. Is this romance with technology in a way contributing or can contribute to these calamities or disasters because of the rose-tinted glasses that we're putting when we look at something that we made with tech? Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Absolutely. There is a great danger that I see insofar as we can default or shirk our responsibilities because we are aware that technology, whatever that may mean, is taking care of it. And so what that for me does is it causes me to think about As you've posited, Lewis, in the question itself, the relationship with technology that we have, and recognizing how technology can bring about a further degree of removal from said reality. In a certain sense, technology becomes a mediating presence. And while that has its benefits, the drawback is that we, as it were, lose touch with the direct one-to-one with reality as such, whatever that reality may be. So with regards to the train derailment and the systems that were occurring there, clearly technology has a great boon if it's used wisely. If we don't have the moral wherewithal to handle it, if we don't just rely on the redundancies, apparatuses that are ingredient to the technology, but that we also take the extra measures seasonally to look into it, if we're not doing that, we're going to set ourselves up for this kind of disaster and failure that may, in one sense, doesn't appear to be happening frequently, but when it does happen, it has catastrophic effects. So this idea of the relationship and the distancing from reality.
I think that's all right, Joe. I'll come out a little bit in the defense of technology on this one. When I think about that, what you just brought up, Lewis, I think about the other situations where technology is starting to take over some of our sort of core responsibilities as human beings, which in themselves are actually technology latent, right? It's, a lot of the things we do are just sort of a simpler form of technology. And I actually think that what that event shows us is that we need more technology, not less. And the reason I say that is because let's think about like something that is more ubiquitous right now, which is like the self-driving cars, right? Which is going to get more so. A Tesla goes over the hill and people start freaking out, right? And the reason is because once we've introduced technology, at least from our perspective, our critique of technology is a lot more than our critique of human beings. So if we lose, no one should have to suffer because of anything. But the reality is, if we were to change all cars today to self-driving cars, the percent of accidents on the road today would dramatically plunge. We would save probably not hundreds of thousands of lives, right? And but to us, just one life lost by technology is an excuse to say that technology is dangerous. Where our own fallibility is excusable. Oh yeah, well, yeah, there was an accident. It was the fault of this human being. So therefore, right? So I think we need to start to rethink the way not only we deal with technology, and this might get into the ethics, Joe. You could see me going towards a more utilitarian perspective
Right.
here, but
Yeah.
I think that we need to start thinking more about the ethics of the choices we have when technology enters our lives.
Can we use the Tesla as like the case model for this conversation? Because when you were talking about the Tesla, I was thinking about all the accidents recently, some of the batteries catching fire. And there was an incident very early on when they were testing out the self-driving feature where somebody wasn't properly manning the car and it led into an accident. And these types of accidents and things with the Tesla, to me, it's like there's a magic fog to the tech. And as the consumer, that I see that it has kind of created a mistrust in the vehicle. It created a mistrust for me in this idea of like, man, this car doesn't know how to drive on the Jackie, with all the craziness and stuff. So I'm wondering what you're describing. I disagree. Like, I guess it's like a fear of the tech or the new tech for me. This idea of self-driving cars almost seems a little more dangerous to me. Like it looks like Tesla, the company, doesn't have a full grasp of the little intricacies of their machine, in that it looks like it's creating some outcomes that they weren't accounting for with like some of their obstacle collision and some of that stuff. I don't know. What's your response to that idea? This idea that the romanticization kind of creates that fog in between the machine and man, like in the understanding between the two.
So I think this is where I think it's dangerous because it's not the technology we're emotional about. We're emotional about the risk.
The loss of control, perhaps.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, that's exactly it. Because you just gave me one case,
Right.
and there's probably a few more cases. But how many times has that car gone onto the road and nothing has happened, right? Versus someone who actually goes in their regular car and starts driving. How many people have we lost there? If you were to look at those two situations, many more people died driving that car manually without the self-driving feature. Many more people died, right? Versus those who actually went into a self-driving car. And by the way, part of the reason self-driving cars are actually not safer than they should be, for example, is because we still have manual things happening, right? It's trying to predict things, right? And I know we'll get into some AI stuff, but that's the problem, is when you start to have like someone crossing the street, but then trying to moonwalk, the AI has to interpret what's going on, right? So it's not taking into account all those situations. So actually, the more we give up to technology, the safer we'll become. I mean, the problem is we get into a sort of kind of a Wall-E situation where, to Joe's point, we've forgotten everything. I think that's more of a danger. But if you look at it purely from a, I think, utilitarian view, there's no contest, right?
Dude, I can't get out of my mind the image of a person walking and then reversing with a moonwalk.
Yeah.
And the Tesla trying to
Great
figure.
example.
Yeah, wow. 100%. I have to vibe with Edwin on this regard. I would say what's helpful in getting us to think about technology is, especially on the practical end, is by perhaps seeking to cultivate certain questions that we can ourselves use as we seek to analyze what this technology is doing. So, for example, very simply, we can ask ourselves two questions. Number one, what does this tech afford us? In other words, what does it grant to us? What is it giving us? And sort of listing that out. And then number two, what does it take away? What does it obscure? What does it remove from us? Or what are at least the threats of those removals, right? Because we could always, quote unquote, turn off the tech. That in and of itself may be a question, right? So I think asking those two questions, what does it give and what does it take away, is really helpful to get ourselves from that sort of misty space that perhaps you were alluding to, Louis, to a kind of more earthy and concrete handling on it. And it also clarifies what's at stake.
We talked about the train derailment. We're talking about Tesla. And in both of those cases, it's like man has a choice with the tech. Like the tech is communicating something, but at the end of the day, man still has a power to either like listen to the tech in the case of the train derailment, or in Tesla, I'm assuming there's like an override. Edwin, you probably know, like, is it an instant override if I like grab the steering wheel? Let's say the car is self-driving. I'm seeing there's a pothole, I don't know, like, and I'm like worried the car isn't going to stop in time. If I give it feedback, if I give the steering wheel direct feedback, would the car like respond in kind, or would it be like give it a couple seconds to go to manual override, then the car's responding?
I wouldn't know what the delay is, but there's a pretty automatic control feature, right? It's, in fact, every self-driving car company tells you keep your hands on the wheel just in case, right?
Okay.
For that very reason, right? It's Joe's point, right? It's that when you do that a couple of times and you realize, man, this car is doing everything it should be doing, at some point you give up control, right? So that tends to be the issue more so than the loss of control, and from the sense of like, there's nothing you can do about it. Usually, especially with those type of technology, usually there's a way for you to regain control.
Right. Because man can like ignore the tech even like as it serves him. And then I think that can create the loss. All of a sudden now I'm just like sleeping in the driver's seat,
Right.
taking it to the extreme or ignoring warning signs that the machine is telling me. Isn't that like ironically taking more away by doing that? You know, like I'm just
What does it give you, right? This is what technology has always been. So, for example, right, we live in our nice, cushy houses, shelter. Tomorrow or today, neither of us need to go out and figure out how to kill an elephant to feed our family,
right. Yeah.
right? We've given that up. I'm not sure what we've given up in that situation, but the technology and the development of the spear and everything else, and then eventually the machine that makes up our economy, that's more than a self-driving car, in my opinion, right?
Mhm.
There are implications for that. We usually find a way to live with it and think through value add in different ways. And one phenomenal example of that is, I just heard about this from the Ezra show, where I was listening to potential psychology of spiders. If spiders were to create a civilization, they would not do anything that we do today. because part of what makes up the genius of a spider is their utilization of the web that they create. So they've actually outsourced in some way their intelligence to the web. So then a lot of what built on their civilization in that sort of scenario is all, or most of it is built on the fact that they have a web, which makes their cognitive capabilities that much more capable, because then they're able to do other things, right? When we're able to, like, I can only use the term outsource, but when we're able to use technology in a way to actually do things for us that we no longer need to do. I mean, self-driving car, you know what I can do if I could just rely on a car to drive me to work?
And not have to be focused.
Not have to be focused. I
Answer a
mean,
few more emails.
answer a few
Right.
more emails. I
Right.
could create a podcast while I'm in the
Right.
car.
Right.
There you go. There you go. No,
That's
you know,
brilliant.
and it does speak to the question about evolution as well. You know, if we think about the spider and how it's outsourcing to the web, and how then its directedness is this kind of reciprocity with its extension by means of the web. And for us as well, speaking of web, our feet used to be far more broad, but with the advent of shoes and this kind of technology, right? Of footwear, the feet become a bit more narrow and whatnot. But we lose something, right? We lose the ability to be barefoot in certain natural terrains. Now, one may ask the question, well, is that a loss or is that a gain? And we can think about that, even to the example you gave, Edwin, with the elephant, the sort of hunter-gathering societies. There is a great gain by not having to, all of us with our respective families, going out to hunt and bring back the game and all of that. But what do we lose? And again, I want to put the stress, or at least the accent, on the loss, because I think I've shared this in our previous episode concerning technology. I just don't think we have the moral wherewithal to handle technology in a way that is humanizing. It tends to, in many ways, be dehumanizing. Now, that's a sort of loaded statement that I'm sharing there, but goes to the point that you shared, Lewis, about the loss of control. And you were thinking about that within the specific context of Tesla. I'm thinking of it even in a sort of more, perhaps to use the word that Edwin brought up earlier, ubiquitous way. In the following sense, technology is insidious in the way it seeps into our very sort of being, as it were, our interaction. So just think of the television, right? Just think of something like the television, think of the cell phone, right? We lose control by means of our passive receptivity to this technology. And we sort of become subsumed in this wildly insidious way into this new mode of being, this new technology. And we are now, right, 50 years out, 20 years out, 80 years out, whatever particular respective technology we're talking about, we are now beginning to see some of the drawbacks of that, right? What does it look like to have a house with no television sets? What does it look like to have a bedroom where the couple doesn't have a TV, right? Choosing to turn that off. We go forward with technology with regards to the resourcing of food, right? We have GMOs. Now we see, oh, wait a minute, there's a link with cancer and what, right? So what is the thing now? Organic. What is organic? The natural, the eschewing of, as it were, a certain technological, a certain apparatus, a certain prowess and capability, because we're realizing, wait, it's not as good. So this accenting for me on the question concerning what is it taking away, I think is very important, because we tend to have a naive, optimistic apprehension of technology, as I shared in our previous episode.
Right. Is there a direct relationship between the acceptance of a new technology and the loss that you're describing?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think it's every technique, whatever it may be, brings with it a new means to an end, but through that, the removal of some direct encounter with said reality. So think of the calculator. Think of the television, since we've been talking about that, right? Well, it's a new means to an end. I can now explore the world through the comfort of my own home, right? I can be beholden to all these new images and these new vistas that I hitherto didn't have access to because I was landlocked by my own socioeconomic situation, right? I didn't have the capacity to travel. Now I can see through the comfort of my home, through this magic box called the television. So that's an amazing thing. What do we lose? Well, we got to think about that, right? Perhaps a certain notion of time, perhaps this passive inactivity, right? It was like, well, I'm just watching, and other things that can come about with that. So I think it happens simultaneously, the gain and the loss, though the loss is perhaps slower to discern, right? We don't necessarily see the immediate effect of the loss. We're just like, we get hyped up on the gain and we're like, wow, look at this. Look at what we're able to get. And then over time, because we as a species, we're very slow to learn, then we're like, maybe we need to think about it. I don't think then, therefore, the solution is to let's get rid of technology, right? I think to Edwin's point, the question then becomes, how do we become more wise with technology and then enhancing technology in a way so as to safeguard our humanity rather than detraction of it?
I would like to turn our conversation now to one piece of technology that is possibly, I'd argue, like the biggest in the world, which is the internet and its global impact. Currently, the Supreme Court is hearing arguments in two cases that could dramatically change the internet based on some of the laws and regulations that major tech companies have flourished under. And so we chatted briefly prior to this recording about the ethical implications and what that means depending on the outcome of these cases. But the internet is this huge technology that almost everyone relies upon. The idea that this piece of technology can dramatically shift as a result of the Supreme Court cases is very real and upon us. And it seems like it could create a type of loss or a change in all of us, depending on the outcome of this case. Can you guys speak into that? What are your thoughts on the Supreme Court case from just like in the context of this conversation with tech? And what are some of the moral and ethical implications of this medium, if you will, just radically shifting to be made?
I'm a bit more optimistic that the decisions that are being made by the Supreme Court are actually will have minimal impact. And maybe optimistic is not the word, because there, to Joe's point, there is a loss in our ability to very wisely live with the technologies that we live today. The Supreme Court is not in a position to either understand or make any decisions that will impact our day-to-day experiences with the technologies that are evolving. And it will be interesting to see, right? The time to have done that, I see, for example, with the advent of ChatGPT and all these large language models that we're starting to interact with, who is thinking about this ethically, right? And who is thinking about the implications of it? There's almost like a body that is missing that should sit outside of the Supreme Court to allow these type of decisions to be made. When the founding fathers decided to think up that we needed the three-part government, I guarantee there's another part that we're not thinking about, right? We're so fixated on the past and the structures that currently exist that we have no imagination to understand what it takes for us to actually optimize the situation we're currently in. Therefore, we default to things like the Supreme Court to make a decision on a technology that they themselves probably haven't even mastered, right? Or understood. I say all of that to say that they'll make a decision. The forces of capitalism is so strong that there's going to be a way to get around that, right? And this has happened countless amount of times. Yeah, there's probably going to be some immediate impacts, but to be quite frank, the innovation that will rise from that will actually, whatever the intent of this case is, will multiply it with the type of innovation we'll create in the coming years.
Court cases like these afford us the capacity to, again, think really carefully about what is at stake. So the question is one of responsibility. The question also is one of impact and who is to be held accountable if technology, by means of its own life, right, its own animus, begins to affect us negatively. And this is good to really think about. And the justices clearly are not necessarily experts in the tech world, as they are not experts in many things that they have to adjudicate on. that's their homework. They need to go ahead and do research and think about this as carefully and as objectively as possible, not with this naive perspective that their own metaphysical commitments won't weigh in to these judgments as well. That being said, we as the people need to also think along with the justices. We don't necessarily have the adjudicating power to affect policy change or whatnot, but our own lives and what we choose to do has an impact on us and on those who are immediately around us. And so we need to continue to think. And I know this is like the note that I continue to stress, but guys, I find it really important for us to slow down and think about these things carefully, which is why I love this episode. I love that we're able to ponder about this and Lewis, the questions that you're raising, because the conversations need to happen. And if we look at history, if we look at how technology has impacted us, whether going into deep history or just the past 100 years, we could see both the positive and the negative effects. And so, given that technology continues to increase and does so exponentially, we need to think more and be very cognizant about what's happening here.
I had this question, and I think you led right to it. Is just within the last couple of years, is tech moving too fast, like too fast for humanity, in the sense of like understanding and responding to the impact of it? Do you guys think tech is moving too fast? What do you guys think of that?
I am one of those people who tend to think that our technology has, in a certain way, surpassed our humanity. And I don't know if it's simply because we're not, to use the word evolution, we're not evolving as quick as we need to in order to keep a pace with technology. Just using evolution here as in a broad term, not in a biological sense. So I don't know. My immediate reaction is yes, but I don't think that's necessarily the issue, right? That is to say, technology is going to do what it's going to do, and it's going to continue to increase exponentially in many sectors. We're not keeping up with the ethical framing. And when I use that sort of the plural pronoun we, I mean myself, and I mean those who I encounter, right? I mean, how many of us are thinking about the impact of, again, I use this basic example, the television or screen time? How many of us are really thinking about that? And we ever only think about it because of the outlets that are coming in and telling us, like, oh, too much screen time does this, that, and the third. So yeah, what the solution is, there's more to say about it, but I'll just leave it at that. What do you think, Edwin?
I think I'm with you, Joe. I do think of technology as co-evolving with us, but it's that definition of us that is the problem. A lot of the constraints that we have on technology is because of a subset of potential people who will either abuse or not understand, or and so on, right? And that puts us in this weird situation where there's a subsection of our society that is capable of using it responsibly, right? And again, we can talk about the AI that we're encountering today, but then all of the constraints that are put on it is because of images that people are starting to create, the concern over potential psychological harm. All of these things that are happening is, in the sense, driven by protecting a subset of our society. And so then what we're saying is that there is a little bit of a trade-off, right? What we're saying then is that we need to be careful about the pace of technology because we can't absorb it fast enough. And I think that's true. Our education system is not built to deal with the velocity of change that we're dealing with today. I actually, quite frankly, I don't know, for you, Joe and Lewis, I wrestle with this one. I don't know if we just keep going because we have in the past, right? One of the most devastating technology in existence today is the car. Devastating. I mean, the amount of people that lose their lives because of the car is amazing, but yet we've accepted it, right? Like, not everybody is responsible enough to use a car. There's a subset of our society in that same way that should not be behind the wheel, right? Yet we're losing so many people because of that, right? If someone goes out, drink and drive, we don't say, oh, we got to get rid of the car, right? We say that it's their responsibility and we find ways to deal with it, but we're never going to stop it. So Part of my concern is that in the slowing of this progress, will we ever be able to actually come to term with the advancements that are currently in place?
Is the solution creating a type of firewall in the sense of a filter of the incoming technology, the new things? And it's not that the firewall is blocking it, but that there's this kind of this space in which you analyze it in the context of being a parent. So, Edwin, I would love to get your take on this. Like, if my child is growing up in this world, they're going to be exposed to the tech of today and tomorrow. I want to prepare them for it. What does that look like as far as my child? The new tech is incoming. Like, is it creating some type of filter, some type of gate, if you will, that helps us to process the technology? Is that what we're talking about here? Or is it just more of like embrace it and figure it out, but also still take the time, like what we were talking about earlier about loss and whatnot? On a practical level, with just tech we've never seen before, what does that look like as far as taking in that input and understanding this new thing?
I'm going to pass most of this to Joe. My initial framing is that there's two extremes. Do you try to keep them away from that technology altogether, which is not possible? Or you have them run into the technology full speed, no filters, which is harmful. And I would love to hear Joe's thoughts around the ethical training that has to occur more concretely that has to occur. So I'm asking you a little bit for parenting advice, Joe. Yeah, like what does that look like? Because I think that's the answer, right?
Now I'm feeling really responsible. The question is a good one, Lewis, because you are sensing, you are intuiting the need to retard the excesses, right? To slow it down. And that's coming from somewhere, right? That's coming from an awareness that you already possess, recognizing what technology can in fact do. Yes, the answer is, I think we need to, with regards to parenting, and parenting is an amazing example, I think, because it can help us to think about the role of government and governance with regards to the allowing of technology to be in the hands of the people, even self-governance, right? What should we allow ourselves to take a hold of? So when I was hearing you guys speak, I immediately also thought about the economic reality, right? We live in a sort of runaway capitalism context. And that's what generates so much of our engagement with tech. Now, how do we actually handle this from the ethical, from the moral? Going back to those two questions that I brought up earlier, what does it afford? That is to say, what does it give? And what does it take away? We need to ask ourselves that carefully. If parents need to really think about those two questions in relation to their children. We also want to look at what the experts are saying, right? What was that documentary on Netflix that spoke about social media and
Oh,
it's
yeah, hold on.
yeah, look it up, man. It's a great
I'm gonna look it up.
example.
Social dilemma, I believe.
Social dilemma. Many of these tech giants, many of these people choose not to allow their own kids to get on those social media platforms that they themselves are the architects of. What does that say?
That's wild.
What does that say? I mean, and they're pumping it out there. So whoever wants to use it under the guise of democracy and the sort of kind of a certain kind of libertarian freedom, yo, if you about it, then be about it. But at what cost? At what cost? And we're seeing what's happening. Even with regards to the advent of the automobile, as Edwin was saying, many lives are lost. But we're not even necessarily, as we're thinking about that, taking into account the ecological crisis, as well as the urban layout change that occurs through living with automobiles. Okay, so we have access to different neighborhoods. I can, as a Brooklynite, I can drive to Bronx, I can go here, I can boom, 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 and get so much done within a day. Is that a good thing? Oh, in one sense, it seems to be, yes. In another sense, I lose community. I now am sort of out of touch with the rootedness that is given to me when I don't have an automobile, you see. And the cities need to rearrange themselves always ever for the automobile. and not for foot traffic. We kind of see this urban planning sort of retreating from that, putting out more bike paths and whatnot. But again, these are things that we need to sort of wrestle with. So to get a little bit more concrete, in terms of parenting, whether it's literally parenting or thinking about it for ourselves, if I'm in the mall, I have the possibility of getting a new gadget. Now, already, the mall itself is a kind of technique. It's already a technology. The fact that I got to the malls, right? So, notwithstanding all of the intricacies of this, but I'm before a store and I have something before me. Okay, I need to ask myself, just because I can doesn't mean I should. Should I? Should I go here? And that's hard because the marketing schema is such that, oh man, I feel the pull. I'm like, this thing is hot. I got to get it. I got to get it, right? It's a little bit faster. It's a little bit shiny or whatever it may be.
hmm
But at what cost? And of course, when I raise that question, not just economically, right? I don't mean just economic, right? But existentially. And because it's insidious, because technology's grip on us is so evasively, like, what cunnily weird, we really need to slow down and run sort of personal experiments. Ah, you know, it's a lot.
Yeah.
I find myself exasperated because
Mm.
of its ubiquitous nature, because there's so much here. And so I think the embedding it in the earthy and in the practical is super important.
I wonder if some of the design philosophy behind certain pieces of popular tech, like mainly either like social media platforms or just like things in the digital world, I get that feeling that I'm sensing from you, Joe, of just like feeling overwhelmed or like just like this shock and awe where so much gets thrown at you. Like let's take a platform like TikTok, right? Like its design is these short clips, but an algorithm is kind of predicting what it thinks you will like. And I don't regularly use TikTok. Like TikTok makes its way to other platforms and I'll see them that way. But from what I hear, both from friends and from reading online, it's like if you give this platform a little bit of time to figure out like what you're watching, it's going to eventually get like really good in the sense of it's just every swipe up, it's giving you something that's going to either pique your interest for a couple of seconds or like just to keep you on the device. Like that's the whole design philosophy is keep you on the device. And it's like if that's the design, right? And what you're talking about as a solution is almost like the opposite of that, of like instead of just like this constant chaos of media ingestion, you're saying slow down, like ask yourself, should you purchase this thing or should you do this thing? They just seem like the antithesis of each other. Like,
Yes,
like
they
one
really are.
is extreme and the other is it sounds like another extreme, even though I think you're not telling everyone to be a Luddite, but I'm seeing these two things that almost are clashing with each other. And I'm wondering, is it possible to find a harmony that's not going to create like anxiety and unrest because you're going back and forth between these two things? Can you guys speak into that? Like, what are your thoughts at this pull between the two?
When you are drowning, the balance is the thrusting counter to the force of gravity that's pulling you down. From the outside, that doesn't seem like a balance, but it's the thing that's going to save your life. If the rod that you want to be straightened is bent this way, you need to counter the force, right? By pushing a lot this way so as to straighten it. Once it's straightened, then we can, as it were, relax. The same with technology, the kind of self-discipline that is needed, I think, in order to use technology wisely will indeed seem like an extreme measure. But I'm not a part of the Amish community. So I'm not one who rejects many of the advancements of technology. Of course, the Amish, they do use a certain kind of technology, right? The horse and buggy is a technology.
Right.
But this idea of a slow simulation of technology for the sake of a keen appraisal of it will look like, within a rampant consumeristic and capitalist culture, seem extreme, but it's the thing that's going to save you. It's the kind of discipline that's going to allow you to have full control over you. And that is because technology, again, has this insidious way of taking a grip on us without even us being aware, until sometimes it's too late. We realize, oh my gosh, I'm addicted. Or my goodness, this is taking so much time away from me, this, that, and the third. Go back to the parenting, right? So much now is being written on from the social psychological domain. I have a friend who does work in that field. The role of the screen, right, of the cell phone between the face of the mother or father and the child, and how much of our learning and our socialization and our sense of self and attachment styles and everything is shaped and formed within those first 1 to 2 years, right? Critically important. But now, because parents are always defaulting to the screen, right? Like, let me just boom, boom, right? How many times I've seen parents, right? They're walking and
Yeah.
and they, they're, and you could tell that the kids are trying, like they're vying for the attention. What is that going to do? What is that doing? Now, what is the solution? Throw away the screens? Not necessarily, right? But we now need greater self-discipline if we're going to parent well with technology at our fingertips. That, again, hitherto we didn't need, because we didn't have access to it. But we did have the television screen. So, right, it was like, what if family time, everyone sit down and lose themselves in television? Okay, there's something entertaining about that. Okay, there's a good that comes from that, perhaps. But what is lost? That family time of connecting, that interpersonal, share with me, how was your day?
Can I add to what you said, Joe? I think this is a really important point. I'll just use an example in my own life, right? So DALL-E just came out, which is a generative AI that creates images. The other day, I took DALL-E and I had my daughter next to me, and I said, why don't you create something? Use your words and we'll create an image. So she said, unicorn with a mermaid tail in a bed with candy, and I created it. And then she saw it and she was amazed, right?
Wow.
Now, the reason there's some level of education here, maybe, I don't know, but the link between that and the judgment, the cost benefit that Joe's speaking about is, at least from my perspective, is pretty clear. Versus TikTok, right? Which I think TikTok is one of the most dangerous things on the planet right now.
Agreed.
Because with the DALL-E situation, I'm tapping into my daughter's imagination to create. With TikTok, what is that doing? Right? But as an individual that has fully formed his self-discipline and so on prior to the development of TikTok, what I did with TikTok was say, you know what I like to do with my time? Whenever I go to TikTok, I would like to see images of the world, and I would like to see something about the news. So what I did is I sat with TikTok for about an hour, and then I started swiping away everything, all the crazy stuff that starts to happen. I don't want to spend my time doing this. This is stupid, right? And then I'm like, oh, there's that image I want, right? And it's like a landscape of the Great Wall of China. And then, like you said, the algorithm learned. So when I pick up TikTok, it starts spitting out something about the news, like something that's happened in the world, which this is what I want, right? I don't want to have to go to Reuters to watch an entire show just to figure out what's going on. And, I have my dose of I really want to tap into what's going on in the world, right? So this discipline that Joe is talking about, and I'm trying to form some level of a framework here that you can apply to your day-to-day life. I think about it as like meditation, right? Or the things that we do and expose ourselves on a day-to-day basis that impacts our psychology. It's a second thought, right? We need to be more purposeful and more educated about that interaction. So Joe, thank you, because as you were talking, I was like, that's it, right? We're literally missing another discipline in our lives. And I think that's how it takes shape.
Thank you both for sharing that, because it seems like to go on those platforms is a type of, or can be utilized as a type of escapist behavior. Like either I'm in an uncomfortable social situation or I'm bored or whatever. And then that mindset is the thing that prompts me to go to these platforms. What you're describing, Edwin, is a very determined way of utilizing the platform, where you were seeking something out and the platform reflected it after you kind of controlled it. that to me is like two different approaches to the platform. And it sounds like your methods doesn't seem as like mainstream, although it should be, like, as far as like, okay, if you're going to Instagram, having a particular way to use it that serves you. And I wonder, is what does the transformation look like for someone who is completely used to almost like TikTok controlling them, in the sense of like, I'm feeling fidgety, and then I've done it so many times without even realizing it. I unlock my phone, and now TikTok's is open. If I want to go from that to, I still want to use TikTok like in these platforms, but I want to use them in a much more valuable way, like utilizing my time in a more efficient way. How can we transform ourselves, like, to have that self-discipline, to move away from the normal style, I'll call it, of utilizing these platforms almost passively?
Yeah, this is the point that, again, this is not about the technology itself, right? So the reason I was able to do that it's just the way I manage my life.
The individual.
As an individual, right?
Mm.
So for me, Joe and I used to talk about this in college. If you wanted to get in trouble, then go to that party, right?
Mm.
But you make the decision that you will be in trouble if you go to that party, right? It's almost a bit metacognitive, right? Where you're like, look, think about the things and the consequences of your actions beforehand, and know thyself, right? This is part of the things that we talk about on this podcast, right? Knowing yourself. And so then I know what my self-discipline has looked like, right? We like to fool ourselves, like, oh yeah, in this situation, I would have done this, right? The reality is like, look, I don't want to have to deal with this temptation here, right? Let me make sure that I've designed my life, that I've designed my day, so I avoid those type of temptation, right?
So you make the decision prior to that immediate point.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's the only way to do.
That's important.
To me, that's the only way to do it, because the problem that we have as human beings is we form habits, and it's a double-edged sword. So when you've made that decision, then you start to craft your habits. When you design your day in such that you're like, I will be here and I'll be doing this, then it becomes a habit. And quite frankly, it takes care of itself within months or a year, because once a habit is a habit, it's a habit, right? So I think the design part is what, as human beings, we really struggle with, right? As consequential as the things we decide to do is, we don't spend a lot of time thinking about the decision. We need to do more of that. That's why I say it's more about technology. But I think, again, just loving this conversation, because some of the things that Joe said connects it for me in terms of the thing that we're missing in terms of our responsibility with technology.
Some practical steps for our listeners and for our viewers, in lieu of your question, Louis, is a couple of things. Number one, I think what's helpful is whatever tech we are thinking about, we want to put a asterisk next to it in our own minds and say, potential danger, potential danger. We may not know what the potential danger is. We just recognize, okay, handle with caution. That's, I think, step number one. Step number two then is to do what Edwin is sharing. Ask ourselves some concrete, realistic questions. What is the cost of doing this? Do I really want to do this? Why am I gravitating towards this? Is this having a pull on me or not? In order for those questions to be efficacious in our lives, well, number one, we have to be able to ask ourselves those questions, which requires a certain kind of discipline. We tend to handle technology and go about our day unreflexively, right? We're just going about reactively rather than reflectively. So it's about cultivating a sort of inner self-awareness concerning our relationship with technology, slowly cultivating those questions. And step number three, once we're able to do that, then we can begin to modify our decision-making process. Okay, I'm going to go on TikTok, but I'm going to set a little alarm for myself for only 5 minutes. Again, it sounds limiting and stifling, but it's actually the way to freedom. This is the paradox here. This is the way, right? You can't speak of authentic freedom without discipline, without the understanding of the inherent logic of rules and regulation as a mode and a means to a greater freedom. That being said, we want to do that. Now, some of us will say to ourselves, sounds great on theory, Joe, but how the hell do you do that? And this is why I think what Edwin is sharing, I think Louis, you were kind of alluding to it. We need spiritual disciplines. We need spiritual practices. We need certain things that we can do every day that will help to cultivate that inner space. within us, whether that's meditation, prayer, or something to that degree in which we are, in a concrete fashion, connecting with the transcendent that then allows us to reposition ourselves existentially to handle the imminent, right? If we're on par with the imminent frame, we're going to be unable to see where we are. The reason why we love GPSs is that they are transcendent from our right two-dimensional reality from a three-dimensional vantage point. So that extra dimension gives us a bigger purview, right? And say, oh, okay. And so the spiritual disciplines, and there are thousands of ways in which we can approach this, help us to get that boom, that extra dimension, so that when I'm on the ground and I'm dealing day in and day out, I have that inner space, to really now consider this or that from a different angle rather than allowing ourselves to be, again, completely taken over by it.
Thank you for that. I think that's very helpful and something to definitely meditate on. I would like to turn our conversation to a new piece of tech we've already discussed a little bit, but AI, and specifically Chat GPT and Bing. I want to take a look at that because it is kind of an in development technology that we're getting access to. Edwin, you've mentioned that you've been using ChatGPT for a little bit of time now. I've been using it a little bit too, and I wanted to ask you, one, can you share how you've been using ChatGPT, what you think of this brand new technology? But also, in light of this conversation, what has your personal experience or impression have been in thinking of your relationship to technology, and now you're utilizing something that's at the forefront of technology?
I'll answer the latter and come back to how I'm using it, which is a lot of what Joe has said is very present in terms of the way I'm looking at what's going on with technology. And I'm consciously optimistic. So I'm watching
Yeah.
myself react to the technology and so on, and saying to myself, what is the trade-off that I'm making as I engage this technology? So very reflective. Journaling is really helpful in that context. Today, I just saw this technology. This is what I thought about it. And then, what happened the next day and so on is part of that practice that helps you think beyond what's going on day to day. That said, I am extremely excited about the prospect of what ChatGPT will turn into. There's a lot of potential negatives to it. I'll speak to the positives for now. We do have to watch out for the negatives, but I've gotten to the point now with my experience with ChatGPT that it's almost like literally like a virtual assistance for
Wow.
me. I'm almost having a conversation with ChatGPT on a day-to-day basis
Wow.
to help me make my life more efficient. In my life, the things I'm able to do today versus what I was able to do about 2 or 3 months ago is not possible. The things I'm able to do today, I think I've compressed literally hours of work into minutes from that perspective. And what that means is I'm able to engage in more things. I'm able to be sort of my fuller self. For me, at least, the most exciting thing is that I'm actually starting to see a level of creativity or access a level of creativity I have never seen before. I see it almost as an add-on to my brain, right? It's almost like someone said, I don't want to turn this into the whole brain as a computer concept, but if you were to use that concept, it's almost like someone just gave me extra dose of GPU that I'm able to actually leverage in my computation on a day-to-day basis, right? I think folks need to take this seriously. This is not a technology that's going away. And what usually happens in a capitalist system is that there's a race, right? And usually your worth and everything else that comes with it is in relation to others. And the faster you figure that out, the better off you will be in that race. We could have a philosophical conversation about what I think about the system, right? But that's not the point here. This is the system that we live in. This is the water and air that we breathe. And if that's the case, then this is one of the things that you have to take very, very seriously.
So would you say at this point, Chat GPT is kind of like integrated into your work life, or even like,
Oh, yeah,
what about like yeah?
absolutely.
Do you think that you have experienced a type of loss by adopting this technology, or is it something that you're still kind of processing? Because it is pretty, it's only a couple of months since you've been using it, but what is your sense of the loss in relationship to the tech?
Man, that's a great question.
Because you said like 3 months, right? That's how long you've been using it total, you'd
About two
say?
months. About two
Okay.
months. Yep.
Yeah, because that's not a long time to really kind of like get a full grasp. Other than like the way you're using it, I'm sure you have like a full grasp of the tool. But as far as the impact, like the longer term effects of it, I don't know if like 2 months will be enough, but I don't know. What are your thoughts?
2 months is not enough because there are things there's capabilities of ChatGPT that I'm not yet familiar with.
Okay.
And I'll use an example, which I'm excited to do, but I'm waiting for ChatGPT's for Dummies version of GPT-3.
Mhm.
I just heard, you may have heard this too, Lewis, just listening to a podcast where a guy took all of his journals and he threw it into the system. And then he asked it to replay back what the system thinks his mood were on any particular day. What is Myers-Briggs type? It actually got it right, right?
Wow.
And there were things that it reflected on. Like it was like, can you give me advice based on what happened a few days ago on X? And ChatGPT was able, because remember, it's a predictive machine, right? So the more it understands you, the more it's able to actually be a virtual psychologist of some type or an assistant, right? It could be almost anything. As long as your relationship from an intellectual perspective is verbal, ChatGPT has the capability that exists currently is beyond what any of us are thinking about right now. So that's something that would be interesting, right? It's actually going to help me know myself better. And I'm already seeing that, right?
Wow.
I hate to say it, but we're not that unique, right? I mean, as individuals, we're all pretty much the same. We have our backgrounds, what influences us, makes us who we are. And if we have shared experiences, chances are the type of people we are is very similar, right? There's that, and there's that, what I'm starting to point into, the intellectual piece of like who we are and the psychology of human beings is actually being tested as well. I mean, I'm super excited.
Wow. Do you think a tool like ChatGPT and the similar AIs will, sounds dramatic, but redefine humanity in the sense of like what you're describing? Like, do you think a tool like that will, in a sense, be like a type of web to the spider, where it's because the way you're talking about it is reminding me of that, like the example you shared earlier about this, the spider civilization. Do you think AI has potential for that, the way that almost like the internet was?
Yeah, I will reference the show
Yeah, yeah, we'll link that for
Ezra
sure.
Klein because
Okay.
I think it's a great one. To the question that you just asked, one of the point the author made was that there's an entire civilization that's built on, and I forgot the subset of animal, but it's crows essentially,
Okay.
very similar to the spiders. The book goes into they see themselves as artificial intelligence. Like they're like, we don't really understand. We're just responding to the way life is. And the question is when the human being asks, well, you seem like you're just like me. So in the question, the response is maybe we are alike and you are also an artificial intelligence,
Huh.
right?
Wow.
There's this emergence that is starting to occur right now around what this thing really means because it's a reflection of ourselves. And now, it's at this point, it's actually evolving in a way that we actually don't understand. The people that built these machines do not understand how it's evolving, period.
Wow. Wow.
Right. And so then when that starts to happen and our collective intelligence, which is an organism of itself, right? I don't know if there's a philosophical equivalent to this. Us as individuals, our individual mind is different from us as a collective, right? And us as a collective is changing rapidly. I don't understand what that's going to become. The only equivalent I have is the Borg.
Wow. Joe, what's your take on these technologies? Because you're not as into like utilizing them the way that Edwin and I have dabbled as well, but what is your take as kind of like from the sidelines? You're reading about it, you're seeing it, but you haven't like personally utilized them. You're just hearing about them.
I see it as a real breakthrough, a new advent of some kind that is not a quantitative jump, but a qualitative leap. It's distinct in kind. It is a tool, a very powerful tool, but kind of, I think, like the advent of writing,
Wow.
right? And the ability to communicate our thoughts and our ideas and our experiences via writing. You know, how that was a radically new thing from an anthropological perspective, right? That I can leave behind my words, or that I can communicate my words and my feelings via writing to persons far from me, right? That was an explosion in technology. And I think AI is that kind of leap forward. We don't know what this is going to mean for us long term. We really are not capable of measuring the potential impact. We can guess, but it is a powerful tool. Just because we can, again, let me go back to this mantra, just because we can doesn't mean we should. Should we use this tool? I think so. It has tremendous potential. But it's interesting, the question that you asked Edwin Lewis about, well, what has this perhaps taken away from you, right? What does the use of AI potentially detract from you? And I think this is something to think about. If I default to AI to solve whatever problems I have, whatever difficulties I'm wrestling with, which is, I think, how probably most of us are using the AI technology right now. What do we lose? Well, we lose the capacity to develop our own cognition. We lose the ability to figure things out on ourselves. Okay, who cares about that? That's a good question. It's sort of like, do I want to be dependent on a car? Do I want to be dependent on crutches? Do I want to be dependent on TV and on cell phones? One sense, it seems to be inescapable given the current society that we're in, that we have to depend on a smartphone. It would become very difficult to get a dumb phone now and to navigate things, but it's doable. If I depend on AI to solve whatever issues I have before me, what is the outcome? What's the benefit? What are the potential blessings? Well, I get the solutions faster in ways in which I can't even imagine. The drawback is that I lose the capacity to do that. It's like a calculator. And so we want to think about, well, am I losing something of my humanity in the use of this technology? And if that's a possible yes, then I want to think about, well, what limits do I want to set on myself for the use of this technology? Just like everything else in this conversation, what limits should I self-impose in order to safeguard the dignity and worth that I am of a human being, so as to not lose myself vis-a-vis this tech? Now, the question philosophically of whether or not this is sentient, what does this mean with regards to consciousness and whatnot, that's a whole nother discussion that we don't have the time or maybe even the means to get into right now, but it is a powerful tool. That's what it is. Something unique on the scene.
Right. Well, thank you guys. I think this conversation, it's funny how more important it's becoming recently, because like I'm experiencing it where it's starting to feel like tech is kind of like outpacing me. Like I always grew up like around tech and dealt with computers at a young age. But for the first time with AI, it feels like, oh, like I'm gonna have to start really doing my homework to stay in tune with the new ways that technology is kind of shaping our day-to-day lives. Thank you guys for this conversation, because I think it's good. This is an area in life that certainly needs the step out and the look from the meta perspective of like, okay, how do we navigate technology?
Absolutely.